Reintegration does not work the way that we thought it did. And we're going to get to that and a lot more. And as you're watching this video, leave your questions and theories below. I love getting to them and answering them in a video I end up putting on my Patreon because it allows us to break down this show together. Let's get into this.
It's not just waking up on a table, it's human interaction.
This didn't feel human. This felt like a nightmare.
First off, his acting in this scene, you could just feel his grief. He says it didn't feel human. It felt like a nightmare, which is just an amazing piece of dialogue because the idea of the severed floor is a nightmare. The idea that his wife is alive down there and not up here is a nightmare. But then also we know, because we've seen Gemma down there, that she's not really human. Like, and what she's going through is a nightmare. And I said this at the end of my last video. This really shows how reintegration is not him just stepping into any mark or remembering things from any mark. This was him like transporting somehow to the severed floor and having an original experience there. Now, how that happens, I have no idea. It just opens up the idea of what reintegration can be. It's like he's existing in two places at one time, and it has nothing to do with the past or the future because it's converging. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
Where are you?
I'm at Lumen. What?
What?
Okay, so in this moment, let's say that he's in the basement in the future. Let's just say that. And he's at work in the past, okay? So when he starts doing this experiment that's in the future, right, it then affects his actions of his innie in the past that day. You get what I'm saying? Because him saying what in the basement and saying what in the severed floor happened at the exact same time. And so it's like the effect of him doing this experiment is like changing the past in a way, or it's like they're just both happening at the same time and like time's no longer linear. Now let's go back to Petey originally telling Mark how reintegration works.
It's like having two different lives suddenly stitched together, but the relativity's fucked. So my first day at Lumen's as far back as my 5th birthday, and with two pasts, it blurs the present too, but they said it would get better.
Now, what I didn't gather when he originally said that is that the two things are essentially linked and occurring at the same time in the present. Now, the implications of that are wild because it's like if someone's reintegrating, are they essentially affecting their path of how they got to where they currently are? Almost on some Loki stuff. And is that how we get the mystery guy back here? Is that how that works? Is this like Mark reintegrating and able to see himself in different points of time or something? Because listen to this dialogue.
You drink less, listen more. It's dumb, but you do it anyway.
It's normal.
Yeah, for me, it might actually happen.
Is that essentially showing how Gemma will come back to life? Is that by Mark changing his actions, essentially it will bring her back because he'd be able to change how things happened back then? I don't know. This show got wild after we started to see how reintegration actually works. As we're seeing how reintegration actually works.
Mark. You okay?
You see what I'm saying? How are those moments happening at the exact same time? That has nothing to do with memories at all. But please leave comments on how you think this is working as far as when it relates to time and what reintegration is actually doing. But out of everything in the episode, let's get to the most powerful part of the episode, in my opinion, and also one of the most intriguing.
Focusing on your own duty and eradicating from your essence childish folly.
I understand.
This makes me have a gigantic theory. But we got one more scene to watch.
You must abandon childish things. You must grow up. You must grow up. Grow.
I want to point this part out. So at first he's talking to his reflection in the mirror, right? And then the way the camera works, it zooms in. And then he essentially breaks the fourth wall. And it's like he's no longer talking to his reflection, but he's talking to us. And then thematically it also goes, because you know they do a lot with reflections and shots in the show to show like the split, you know, thematically with being severed, and that split stops and all we see is one reflection, right? And we only see him, and it's like he's trying to get into his own soul with this affirmation. But what I wanted to get to with my theory here is that I think Milchick worked at this Lumen place while he was a kid, and he was in the same program that Miss Wong is in, and you know, maybe Harmony or somebody else was his mentor at the time. And it seems like there's some type of fellowship that gets these kids into like a college or an academy type situation that allows them to have like a manager position later at Lumen. And I think that's what happened to Milchick, and it took his childhood away. And that's why he's like telling himself to grow. Now, obviously, he dwindled his language down, like when, that was the critique against him. So he went from saying his very, complex statement and made it as simple as possible, which is to grow. And he's really telling himself that. And I think it's on the level, like I said, I think he like lost his childhood in one way, but also he obviously doesn't want to be working for Lumen. He obviously doesn't like what he's doing. And I feel like he's telling himself to grow and get brave enough to do what he wants to do, which I think he's going to start helping the innies. He's like the only person that sees innies as people and is actually kind and wants to help them. And also the concept of bravery was a theme during this scene.
I don't want to get in trouble right now.
Okay, well, I don't give a shit about that, so I'll go get it. You said it's behind the poster of you actually being brave?
And so, yeah, I think that comes back with Milchick. And in this episode, that's him trying to be brave, to do what he actually wants to do. Now let's get into the whole Mark and Helly and Helena part of this episode, the romance / drama of it all.
Helly, we shared vessels.
The word choice Mark used there was really interesting, where he said vessels, because it's this separation of them being innies and kind of not having that humanity and not being able to say bodies, right? He said vessels. I think in a way he was saying it that way to soften the blow, to like detach it from it being their bodies that they had that happen to, where essentially they both got assaulted by Helena because neither one of them had consent. That's important here. And then also what's interesting is that Helly in this episode and last episode does refer, she feels violated in her body, that Helena took her body. And I find it really interesting that Mark, who his Audi, he's an avoidant type. And so him trying to detach makes sense. He's doing that through his vocab. And then Helly's over here feeling really violated in her body, and she's making that known. I thought that was really interesting. I also want to talk about this shot and this shot right here. They're essentially kind of framed the same exact way, but there's this progression from one where she's feeling like she wants to pull back from him. And then after this is after they shared vessels. And then she got his blood on her from, kissing her. And so it's like now they're together and she has blood on her hands. We're going to see how that comes back. So between Milchick and Mark and Helly and Dylan, everybody is dealing with a problem of not having that autonomy over themselves. And what's really cool is we get this small shot of Helly trying to get that control back over herself. And the reason I think that has to do with her being in control is her piece of dialogue right here.
That she used me to track my friends, used my body to get close to you, that she dresses me in the morning like I'm a baby, that she controls me and this company and all of us. It's disgusting.
So she made a direct comment about her not being in control of what she wears, and then she takes her shoes off. It's a small way of her gaining back her own control. And on another note, I just want to say that when she said that she dresses her like a baby, I realized, I went back and watched some older episodes, and the idea of the innies being children pops up over and over and over and over again. And then we have like the babies in the intro, and we have Miss Wong as a child working. Like, it's really, it's interesting. I don't know where they're going with that, but the theme is 100% there, that the innies either represent children to people because, technically they've only been alive for like a couple years and all this, or it does have something to do with some type of, science experiment or something with like birth and rebirth and all that. I don't know, but the idea of them being kids, they get likened to kids and animals a lot. So let's talk about something interesting about when Helly and Mark go into the room with the plastic tent. So we get this scene right here, and we know what goes down here. But then when he remembers this during the reintegration process, we see this shot, and this is what I'm talking about, where it's so weird. So now he's in first person view of any Mark as a memory. Now he's in the first person. So there is a difference between him having a memory with any Mark, but then it seems like he can have original experiences in the severed floor during reintegration. Even then it also seems like his actions affect the any floor at like the same time, even though his is in the future. Like, what's going on? Once again, please leave comments on that. I can't wrap my mind around it.
Do you want me to describe what happened? I feel like you have every right.
No, I don't want her memory.
Complete opposite of what's going on with Mark's character, where he does want his any memory. I just thought that was interesting, that contrast right there. Also, just back at this moment for a second, I thought it was extremely powerful on a writing level, a social commentary level, all of that, how Mark asked for consent with Helly first. And I just think that speaks a lot to his character with what he just went through, because he also feels violated, which I think that is going to be an important detail with how the dynamic in his relationship with Helly, like coming from his side too. I think he's going to have some trauma with that. Now, on to Reghabi real quick, because Reghabi did something really suspicious, and she may have also foreshadowed something. Let's talk about it.
Are you at Lumen or in your basement with me?
I don't know.
Do you remember a hallway? A black hallway?
I remember.
First suspicious thing. What does she know about the black hallway? Why is she interested in the black hallway? This is the first time we know that she's aware of it. Why is it important to her?
You feel gaps in time until it all comes back together.
Gap in time till it all comes back together. So she's saying to him it feels like it's still in the past, but eventually it'll still all feel like in the present. But I feel like she knows. I feel like she knows what is actually going to happen. And it does have to do with time relativity.
There's a slight chance of hemorrhage.
Okay, so me bleeding to death.
Not necessarily.
I think she knew that when she did it, he was going to die. And the next episode is called this, Chikai Bardo, which is a Buddhist tradition, and it's a pivotal moment of the first stage of death, a razor-thin boundary between life and the final breath. And so I think she was risking it on purpose. Also, I think what that means for the next episode is somehow that moment between life and death, he's still going to be able to operate somehow with how time is working, and it's how it's all relative and stuff like that. Something's going to happen with that.
That you've already
Okay,
got.
you know what? Get the fuck off me. I am not doing this.
Close,
okay?
it's happening.
Get this shit
We
off
need to
right now.
push.
So she is really obsessed with this at this point. And we know that she's been, it's been important to her, the reintegration, right? But now we're seeing like a new level of obsession where she obviously has something to gain from this that's of vital importance to her or somebody else. If she's working for somebody else, she's looking real suspect after this episode. And unfortunately, now we got to get to who else is looking extremely suspect after this episode.
Yes, of course. Do you not? No, I do.
Attila?
Yes, Attila.
Now, Burt, clearly a spy. Clearly Lumen's spy here. But Attila's the name of the episode, so let's talk about that. So Attila can mean father, but also he was a Hun leader that was very barbaric, very cruel, which is why they say this.
We used to call each other Hun. Then about 10 years ago, that became Attila. Because, do you know history?
The history of the Huns. Now, this whole idea right here of Burt wanting to sever himself, well, his partner wanted him to become severed so that his soul could still be saved. A part of him could still go to heaven. That's ridiculously interesting on all types of levels, like a human level, a religious level, theology, all of it. But what's really interesting to me is the Christian part in general. Because I was assuming that everybody in Kierland saw Kier as a god. And I wonder if it's like a level of sacrilegious to be a Christian living in this Kier state.
He's looking for the exit.
No, just,
Hey, listen, on a writing level, I feel like that is kind of playing into the idea of like any Irving was like he was looking for the exit as far as the stairwell to leave. I think the exit could also maybe refer to the black elevator because Burt obviously knows that he's looking for the export hall because Burt invited him to dinner, and now you have Mr. Frolic over here spying on Irving's place, his house, which is also kind of interesting because I wonder why he was making Lumen paranoid. Like they're obviously on to Irving, but I want to know how. Like, what did he do?
It wasn't 10 years ago, it was 20.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes, because I remember we're having drinks with your Lumon partner. Quite startled him.
Didn't the first severed office open 12 years ago? Yes, it did.
Now that we're talking about time, now there's another distortion of now if there's a whole nother 8 years of things being severed that nobody knew about. I'm curious if people were like severed against their will, like maybe they didn't even know, or maybe they were like the initial experiments where James Egan was talking about the original chip being that green with blue lights at the end of season 1. But what's really interesting to me is remember in season 1, they had the whole like uprising of O&D and all that and the painting of like that rebellion. I'm wondering if that's something that actually happened in that first 8 years. And then somehow like they programmed the innies to forget or something like that, because Burt also knew a verse of the Kier handbook that had been completely out of print that Irving didn't even know about. And I can't remember which episode that was from. I was looking for the clip. I can't remember. And so yeah, Burt has been there for a while. I'm also really curious about who the partner is, the Lumen partner that was just brought up. I wonder who that was.
I've been talking to Pastor Gale about this. I believe that innies deserve to experience love. I mean,
now what's interesting about that in the context of this episode is that there's a lot of outies that aren't experiencing love, that want to experience love. Because even though Dylan and his wife are married, obviously, she doesn't feel loved as an outie. And she's finding love with the innie. And that's this concept of like cheating on your husband with your husband's innie. That's a crazy plot. You also have Helena, outie Helly, that also hasn't really experienced love before. That found it with innie Mark, not outie Mark. And so that line of dialogue of thinking that innies deserve love, it's just really interesting because it seems like the innies are who actually connect with people the most when they have the opportunity. And it's like the outie versions of themselves are all reserved and things like that and don't actually have that love. And since I just skipped to it, let's talk about this diner scene with Helena and Mark, because there's something that definitely has a double meaning here that I haven't really seen people talk about.
You should meet him sometime.
Your father?
Sure, why not?
You want to take me home to Dad already?
Yeah, I think it's finally time.
Okay, sure, let's do it.
You'd be the first.
So people saw that as Helena flirting, which I'm sure that's there. But if you're reading into it more on a media literacy level, Mark could be an experiment that her dad wants to see, that it's like her job to bring Mark to her dad and like have him meet her, and that he'd be the first. Maybe something around Cold Harbor. Maybe he's almost like a finished experiment, whatever. I also think this does mean that Mark will be meeting James Egan at some point, whether that's this season, next season, I don't know. And that when they meet each other, that's going to be interesting, especially if this is flirting and she finds out that she does love outie Mark, which we don't know because she originally fell for innie Mark. That all the dynamics are so funny, man. This is crazy. But let's keep on this love topic for a second. So as things are flashing, we get this picture of Gemma. And what's really interesting here is that Gemma's wearing her outside clothes in the Lumen hallway, just like Mark was wearing his outside clothes in the Lumen hallway at the end of the last episode. Also, we see that Gemma's wearing purple, which I feel like this is the first time we see the color purple in this show, outside of that one office that's on the severed floor that has a bunch of the like purple desks and all that, which I find that interesting because colors are very important in this show. And we see Gemma looking completely different, which reminds me of this.
And I know you've already been through so much with losing your wife and all. Hanna.
Gemma.
Right, Gemma. It's a car accident, right?
That's right.
She was so young.
So let's talk about Gemma and the whole like iterations thing of Cold Harbor. So first off, Hanna. She may have been named Hanna before. Rickon calls Gemma Nan in his book because she wanted to remain anonymous. Nan is short for Hanna. Okay, then also, once again, like I brought up early in this video, the whole child young thing. She just said it was a shame she's so young. What if she was young as far as that iteration of her was like a couple years old or something, like how the innies are? What? But yeah, I would not be surprised if Hanna used to be her name. And like that also reminded me that in the first season, when Becca, Rickon's friend, when they were at the reading for his book and he finished the chapter and she said, "Oh, that was so transformative, I'm gonna have to change my name again." I don't know if that's connected at all, but that's what it reminds me of. But yeah, Hanna was a previous iteration of Gemma, if that's a thing. For sure. And as we get to the end, there's two more things I want to point out.
And what is that smell?
What smell?
So right there in that moment when he's saying, "What's that smell?" and he can't pick up his water, I don't think he can't pick up his water or he's nudging it because, like, you know, he's about to pass out. I think he's currently innie Mark somewhere else, and he looked down and he saw whatever the smell was, and then he's doing something as innie Mark with his hand. But we're just not seeing that in this episode, but we're going to see it later as to what he's looking at right there. Because like I said, these things are like happening at the same exact time, even though it's like future and past too. Like it's weird. Just like Reghabi said, things coming together, I think it came together right here. And then lastly, this cool small detail I picked out at the very end. So when Irving's leaving right here, it reminds me that that floor with the lights reminded me of the Lumen hallway. like when they're walking towards the goats. And what's really interesting, if you think about it, you know, that hallway's below them and the lights are on the ceiling. And now they're like, you know, in the real world. So like the lights would be on the floor, you know, I don't know, just reminds me of that, just like the same imagery. If you love this video and want to support the channel, you could go ahead and join the Patreon and become part of the Foster fam. I would greatly appreciate it. And you begin to join an awesome community where we could break down these shows together. And I just can't wait for next week. This episode just opened up so many things, like with the relationships, the reintegration, all of it just opened up so much. But at the same time, I feel like it got us closer to getting answers. Until next week, I'll see y'all.